Here is the latest update for the Water Resources Outlook for the California-Nevada River Forecast Center for Friday, March 1st. In late November and early December, there was a series of very warm and wet storms that dropped over 20 inches of precipitation in some parts of Northern California. And these storms collectively added over 1 million acre-feet of storage to the major water supply reservoirs in Northern California, including Lake Shasta, Oroville, and Folsom. Additional storms came in December, and these were cooler and actually gave a good boost to the regional snowpack. Consequently, much of the precipitation totals for the water year starting October 1st were impressive and ran well above normal to date, well into December. However, the precipitation shut down by the end of December and has been relatively dry since, and the percentage of normal of water year precipitation totals has dropped off steadily since then. Now we're significantly below normal in much of Southern California and Nevada, although amounts compared to normal for this time of year for the water year are still close to or slightly below normal for Northern California. If we look at the snow water equivalent in the mountains right now, based on the snowpack that's up there, we can see that amounts are generally in the 60 to 80% of normal range for much of Northern California. In the southern part of the San Joaquin Basin, amounts are lower, more in the 50 to 70% range, and quite variable across Nevada depending on elevation. Looking at the forecast April to July runoff volumes, we can see that we have dropped off considerably from early projections, and now they're running 50 to 70% for much of Northern California. Some areas up around Lake Shasta and the north coast are up higher, 70 to 80% of normal, but many areas are very dry, including the Humboldt Basin with 50% or less compared to normal expected runoff volume. The same with the southern San Joaquin and Tulare Lake basins, and much of the coast from the central coast down into Southern California. We can see this trend in the trend plot for Lake Oroville. What you're looking at in the blue line depicts the actual runoff that was observed. The green X's that go across are the daily seasonal forecasts that trend up and down depending on what the weather forecast is and where we're at. And you can see that the storms in late November and early December boosted the forecast actually above normal throughout much of December, but once precipitation shut down by the end of December, these forecasts started dropping off, and they've been falling steadily since then, and now show an expected seasonal runoff volume considerably below normal. Much of that early season precipitation was liquid due to the high snow elevations with those storms, and consequently much of that water ended up in the state's reservoirs, which had plenty of room for it. They didn't really need to release any of that for flood control space. They were able to absorb it, and as mentioned earlier, Lake Shasta, Lake Oroville, and Folsom collectively added over 1 million acre-feet of storage during that time. Currently, these reservoirs are sitting at anywhere from near to slightly above their historical average for this time of year, so the reservoirs are starting out in good shape. It's just that the runoff volumes expected are going to be below normal for this season. Looking at the short-term weather to see what's coming over the next week or so, we've got a couple of storm systems that'll move through, primarily hitting the north coast of California on Monday night and Tuesday, spreading into the Lake Shasta region on Tuesday, and then hitting the Sierra Nevada mountains Tuesday night and Wednesday. And the totals from these storms are going to be, you can see the River Forecast Center's 5-day precipitation forecast on the left here, and it shows amounts from 1 to 2 inches. If you add a little bit more for later in the week with some additional storms from the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center in Washington going through the late part of the week into the early weekend, a little bit more comes in. Totals, however, from these storms are not likely to exceed 2 inches for the major water supply regions, and probably will end up with water equivalent amounts an inch or less. If we look out from the Climate Prediction Center, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center in the 8 to 14 day outlook, they're predicting a below normal precipitation, basically a higher probability of below normal precipitation for much of the west coast and interior west of the U.S. for that period. And their climate outlook for the month of March is also below normal for California, Nevada, and extending eastward into the southern Rockies and Great Plains, and then below normal conditions for much of the west and northwest part of the United States too. If we look farther, the climate outlook going out into March, April, May, the 3-month outlook, conditions are not all that impressive either, with below normal precipitation expected for much of the same areas in the west. So the long-term outlook is not that great. The current snowpack and projections from the California Nevada River Forecast Center show that seasonal volume runoffs will be below normal, perhaps in the 60 to 80% range presently. Could drop off if it remains dry to even lower amounts. However, there is a moderate amount of storage already in the reservoirs, and so long-term impacts in terms of drought probably won't be that severe unless next season is also dry. These droughts have a tendency to magnify as longer and longer periods of going without precipitation. So that remains to be seen, but the outlook is looking relatively dry and below normal, although we do have some short-term weather coming in for next week to help out. Remember that we issue daily updates of our water resources forecasts, including our river forecasts. After the snow course measurements that are being taken now come in and get processed into our system next week, we'll adjust our models to better align with these observed snow measurements, and these will be reflected in our daily forecast, probably starting the end of next week or possibly the week after. And that concludes this outlook for Friday, March 1st.